Recently, the Bank of Canada became the first G7 country to lower its interest rates, cutting them from 5% to 4.75%. This marks the country's first rate cut since July of last year. Following this, on Thursday, the European Central Bank, ECB, also announced a 25 basis point rate cut, making it the second G7 central bank to do so. These moves signify the beginning of a global wave of interest rate cuts. Notably, despite the Bank of Canada's early move, its inflation level remains above the 2% target, and similarly, the Eurozone's current inflation rate is also above 2%. Does this mean that the 2% inflation target is no longer important? Analyzing the inflation data and recent central bank statements, it appears that the significant downward trend in inflation has driven these rate cut decisions. Data shows that Canada's inflation rate is currently at 2.7%, having continuously declined from December last year to April this year. The Bank of Canada stated in its announcement, 3-month core inflation measures indicate that CPI continues to show a downward trend. Given evidence that underlying inflation is easing, the Bank of Canada's Governing Council agreed that monetary policy no longer needs to be as restrictive and lowered the policy rate by 25 basis points. Meanwhile, the ECB emphasized that it does not make any pre-commitments to a specific interest rate path, allowing for greater flexibility in future monetary policy. From the statements of the central banks, it is clear that the rate cuts are backed by a significant downward trend in inflation. Canada's inflation rate has fallen from its peak to 2.7%, and the Eurozone's inflation rate has also dropped from over 10% at the end of 2022 to just above 2%. The market has responded accordingly, with the latest 10-year government bond yields falling to around 4.3%, marking the lowest level in the past 2 months. Meanwhile, the labor market has also shown positive signs. ADP's employment report for May showed an increase of only 152,000 jobs, below the expected 175,000, indicating further cooling in the labor market. The decline in manufacturing jobs was particularly notable, with a reduction of 20,000 jobs in May, continuing a year-and-a-half-long shrinking trend. Despite this, job growth in the service sector remains strong, particularly in trade, transportation, and utilities. Market expectations for a 25 basis point rate cut by the Federal Reserve in September have risen to nearly 70%. Additionally, the market is eagerly anticipating Friday's non-farm payroll data and next week's CPI data and rate decision. If employment and CPI data continue to show positive trends, it could make rate cuts in September or even July more likely. Some institutions predict that the nominal CPI for May in the U.S. may increase by 0.07% month-on-month, and core CPI may increase by 0.27% month-on-month, indicating easing inflation pressure. The previously high rental inflation is expected to see a significant decline, contributing significantly to easing overall inflation. If the CPI data meets or falls below expectations, it will provide the Federal Reserve with more room to cut rates to stimulate economic growth.